what we're presenting today is part of a larger effort. So what you're seeing here, we've gone through and we're assessing the impact of megatrends on CGIAR impact areas. However, today we're really only talking about one impact area, gender equality, youth, and social inclusion. There is a lot of detail in the report that we had the QR code up just recently. Hopefully you accessed that. There's a lot of information in there that I'm not going to get to. As well, keep an eye out. There's more to follow, I believe, in December if we meet our targets. So, let's see, I've got to be careful here. So, CGIAR, a couple of years back, released a 2030 research and innovation strategy. Part of this strategy was a focus on 5 impact areas. Okay, and a lot of, and with each of those impact areas, they had associated global targets that were essentially goals that they were seeking to achieve. These were based on foresighting efforts at the time and understanding of megatrends at the time as well, and how the understanding of how those might play out. The purpose of this exercise, 2 years later, we're asking, well, how have our understanding of those dynamics evolved, and how should that impact the strategy? So, and I say this very explicitly, looking at the specific changes in those trends is perhaps not what we're doing. It's not really within the scope, but the changes in our understanding of those trends and the events that have helped us to figure out where they are going and how they might be accelerating or decelerating and so on. That is really part of what we're looking at. And this is explicitly a literature review. We're looking at the work that has been done on this within the past couple of years, the information that could not have been accounted for in this initial strategy. We are not actually doing megatrend analysis on our own, as that's beyond the scope of what it is, our mandate, our terms of reference. So, give some thought to what actually has happened in that period of time. Despite the fact that these strategic analysis was released 2 years ago, the data it was based on was before COVID. It was 2019. And so there are a lot of things that have happened in the world since then that affect how we understand what goals we need to achieve and what strategy is actually going to be important. COVID-19, of course, had giant impacts on supply chains around the world, on trade, and of course on poverty, employment, food insecurity. It's the single largest economic crisis in the last century. And that's something we need to take account of. The war in Ukraine also disrupted both grain markets and energy markets, having massive effects in certain parts of the world, different regions of the world. Both of them reshaped not only just the markets, but they also reshaped public investment and the direction of public funds to address some of these same issues that are included in these global targets. So we've got to consider how those sorts of things interact. Beyond that, we mentioned here new knowledge. Over the course of the last couple of years, we've gotten a lot more information about the speed of climate change. We've seen an uptick in the number of sort of global and large weather events, increasing in the frequency beyond what was expected. There are now 32.6 million people displaced by natural disasters, which is 41% above the 10-year average. It's increasing. It's something to worry about. Along with this, we've seen a lot of innovation in science and technology. COVID itself generated lockdowns, labor shortages. All of that led to a rapid adoption of some digital technology that have had spillover effects beyond just those of us who work in offices. And Beyond that, of course, rapid developments in AI and commercialization of AI. And think even just about what's happened in the last few weeks and what sorts of impacts that might have. We've had earthquakes in Morocco and Afghanistan. We've had flooding in Libya, a global heat wave around the Mediterranean, and of course, not to mention the Israel-Hamas war that seems to be having impacts well outside of those boundaries as well. So let me present to you here. Our read of the literature, we find 9 of these megatrends that we consider to be relevant and important, related to the 5 CGIAR impact areas. Notably, each of these are sort of long-standing megatrends. We're not identifying something new, although we see that there are new things happening in our understanding of them, and they're interconnected, and they're having significant impacts in ways that we find important, specifically with regard to gender equality, youth, and social inclusion. So, what are these? I'm sure you couldn't read them on the last page, so let's go through them. So first, demographic changes. Prominent among these, population growth, as well as aging. Population growth primarily among low and middle income countries. We see, like I said, population aging, migration, urbanization, which is important, but also specifically thinking about youth. It's been a degrading of employment options in much of the world, and specifically changes in sort of the way agricultural opportunities are viewed. We heard a bit about that in the last session, which is important. We have changing consumption patterns. Throughout much of the world, we see a dietary transition to diets that mirror Western diets, that create dietary disease and a lot of problems associated with that. This was led by changes in urban areas, but seems to have made its way into rural areas as well. So something we need to worry about. Climate change, market concentration. Market concentration, we see an increase in concentration, both in input side as well as outputs processing and distribution. This changes the relative benefits you can get out of farming and agriculture. And at the same time, we see changes in the size of farms and the distribution of the size of farms, fractionalization and fragmentation of rural and peri-urban farms, where we now see these small holders sitting right alongside these massive mega farms, which has some implications perhaps for the returns to farming for those small holders, and maybe has implications specifically for women and their prospects. Climate change, I mentioned the increase in natural disasters. Women and children are 14 times more likely to be killed during a climate-induced disaster than are men. And as we see these ticking up, it again is something that's probably going to have a disproportionate impact on women and children. Environmental degradation. About 70% of the world's accessible fresh water is used in agriculture, and we've started to see an uptick in the number of conflicts around water, specifically in places like Iraq, Somalia, Yemen, Sudan. This is, again, a concern that we see these conflicts pop up. Those conflicts are going to interact with well-being and the safety of the people involved in those conflicts specifically, and women and children in particular. Health challenges. So I will not elaborate too much on those. I already mentioned growing problems with obesity and food scarcity or insecurity. We also see in the COVID-19 pandemic, it sort of underscores the growing vulnerability we have to being so interconnected globally, that these sorts of pandemic can form and spread widely. And we saw over the course of that pandemic a disproportionate effect on income losses among women and disadvantaged groups, women and youth being both among those. Geopolitical instability, again, this is I don't need to point to too many incidents before I could convince you that we're seeing a rising geopolitical instability. And there, again, we would expect this sort of disproportionate impact where women and children living in or fleeing these conflict areas, they face an increased risk of sexual violence, of exploitation, and being trafficked. Things that we, again, fall very clearly within the targets that we're looking at. Inequality. Over the course of the pandemic and what unfolded from that, we saw the largest rise in between country income inequality in 3 decades. And I've already mentioned a little bit of how that skews in terms of the impacts on disadvantaged groups. Finally, technology and innovation. Technology and innovation, we see continuing rapid development of technologies. And we also find within the literature an identification that much of what's being developed is being developed to address technology problems and work problems around men and their work. There is a gender gap that needs to be addressed. There's also a gap between wealthy and less wealthy countries and the types of problems they're facing and what technology is being used to address. So, let me check my time. Okay, so there were 2 collective global targets that the CGIAR developed to address gender equality, youth and social inclusion, closing the gender gap in rights to economic resources, access to ownership and control over land and natural resources for over 500 million women who work in food, land, and water systems, and offering rewarding opportunities to 267 million young people who are not in employment, education, or training. There's actually not one of the targets that's specifically about social inclusion, which is something to note, something we'll come back to. And I won't actually spend much time on this slide. This is just giving a bit of background. I think I'm running over time. Yeah, a bit of background on essentially the current standing of women and youth within agricultural systems and agricultural production and work. There are substantial inequalities that need to be addressed. So, doing a review of the literature, we come up with from our 9 megatrends that are identified, we identify 7 implications, and I'll call these emerging implications. As I mentioned, our final report is yet to come out, and so some of these might be adjusted somewhat, but here are 7 that we have found thus far. First, a call for more in-depth analysis of megatrends. As we do this, we've found quite a lot that is of use that comes out very regularly, and as things progress, we expect there are going to be a continuing number of events that give us greater information about these megatrends and how things evolve. We need to stay on top of it and adjust our strategy accordingly. 2, address the absence of a collective target on social inclusion. This is something that seems like it would be important. If you read our initial report, we've talked somewhat about social inclusion for indigenous groups, but there are a lot of other groups that perhaps should be considered and discussed and focused on in future research and innovation. 3, improve the in-depth contextual understanding of agri-food systems. We heard in our last session about how context can matter, right? You think about cultural barriers or resource barriers. A lot of those are regional. A lot of those are going to be unique to certain parts of the world. And understanding how those barriers impact and interact with these megatrends is going to be important in figuring out what questions need to be solved and how those answers are going to be unique to particular contexts. Let's see, 4, investigate the drivers of deep-rooted and widespread inequalities. And I want to point you back to some of the couple of points we made about how these large-scale disasters or conflicts have exacerbated inequality. And they've done it in ways that perhaps we see and we identify, but we don't know exactly the underlying root causes. The more we understand about these underlying root causes, the more we can create equality that is going to be robust and less vulnerable to these types of disasters or shocks. 5, engage youth in the design of development, implementation of work packages, specifically targeting their challenges. We see this problem of engaging youth in agriculture, again, something that was mentioned in our previous discussion. And we think that it's important to engage youth in trying to address that, youth interest in agriculture. 6, technologies and innovation, scaling those up, and specifically thinking about those as one particular strategy that might be useful in addressing youth. I can speak sometimes. And 7, ensure that CGIAR and partners possess adequate capacities and resources to integrate digital AR4D. So making sure that we are part of that. We have a series of next steps. We do plan on completing the assessment, our literature review of these impact areas, all 5 of them, and diffuse the findings that we have, and hopefully incorporating those in our next step in our evaluations going forward. So, thank you.